Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is episode number 48 of Project Odyssey. How did you like that 46 and 47 double cinematic episode? Originally, I had planned on releasing it as one big episode, but I thought it was only going to be about 40 minutes long, and once it turned out that it was more like 60, I decided to split it in half and do two 30-minute episodes instead. But that is behind us now. It is time to move on to bigger and better things. Poor Joseph, though. Worst case scenario, poor Joseph is dead. Best case scenario, he's trapped in some alternate dimension when he slipped in with everybody else from the other dimension and went back with their ship. Will we ever see him again? Who knows? But the rest of this mission is going to be carried out by just the 5 that are in the crew now. And what is that mission? Well, it's time to finally get all of these modules down onto the surface of Duna. If you recall, we only have the airlock on the surface. So at the beginning of this episode, I am going to quickly capture one after the other the remaining modules. Now, just to give you a recap of what we've got going on, there's over a dozen modules headed to Duna right now, and they're all going to capture, and then once I have them in low orbits, we'll pick some times to bring them down all at the same base. But beyond that, we also have various things like communication satellites all around at different orbits, all around Duna and Ike. We've got a couple that are outside the radius of Ike so that we can use them as links to take us back to Kerbin. Those communicate with deep space satellites that are pretty far along the orbit, along Kerbin's orbit, up ahead and behind Kerbin. And those in turn communicate with the Molnia orbit satellite that goes way up over the North Pole of Kerbin and then heads back down again, quickly running past the South Pole and then heading up for days it takes to get up to that North Pole before turning and coming down again. We probably won't be dealing much with the stuff that's back around Kerbin. All the rest of this series is going to be taking place now at Duna. So Odyssey Station, that is still around Kerbin right now, is behind us as well. I don't think we'll be visiting that anymore. The Copernicus is going to be the last to make it into the low Duna orbits here. The next one that's coming in now is an ascent vehicle. We need to make sure that one of these is on the surface and fully functional. It has a drill to supply it with all the fuel it's going to need to get back to orbit later. This needs to be on the surface first. If we don't have one of these ready to go, then there's no point in doing this mission at all. If we can't get off the surface, we'll be stranded there. So this is going to go down first. And after we get back some telemetry saying that the drill is functional and the tanks are filling up, then the crew will be willing to go down and join them. So all dozen or so of these captures is going to look pretty much like this one. So therefore, I'll give a little bit longer view of this one, but then we're going to rapid fire just go through all the others one after the other, get them out of the way, get everything into its low orbit, and move on to landing some of this stuff, which should be a little bit more interesting than watching 12 captures one after the other. So it has been a couple months, maybe more than that, since I've actually played Project Odyssey. I've been making that cinematic for all that time, and when I wasn't doing that, I was doing stuff like Operation Gold Strike. And one thing I'm noticing is that I really miss some of the mods and features of 1.04 when I go backward here and play in the 0.25 version of KSP. It shall be bittersweet when this ends. I'm going to be happy that I can move on to the new version because I cannot take Odyssey into the new version. I tried and it just doesn't work. But I'll also be sad because it's over. Tear beside eye. Well, the first module has been captured, and as the second one is coming in, I realized that I had said the first one was the ascent vehicle, and I can tell by the look of this one here, this is an ascent vehicle. That other one was a HAB module. Even though the HAB came in and captured ahead of the ascent vehicle will still be the one we're going to bring down to the surface next to join that airlock at the site of the base. So 2 have captured, we're capturing a third now. This is a greenhouse module, and you can see in the Kerbal alarm clock some of the other intercepts and maneuver nodes that are going to be taking place in the near future. So let's just quickly get ourselves through all of these one by one. And pretty soon it's going to look like a Los Angeles traffic jam here with all of these modules that are flying around, going through their low orbits here at Duna. That's because we have 2 copies of pretty much everything that we're sending here. There's 2 ascent vehicles, 2 habitat modules, a couple greenhouses. We got the Copernicus coming in. We have some extra supplies, cargo vehicles, a science module, lots of stuff to bring down to the surface. Now, in the process of doing all of these, I've been doing an awful lot of quick saving because every now and then the game crashes, and I'll tell you that's one thing that I like about 1.04. That version is very stable for me. It hasn't crashed once. 0.25, every now and then it'll just take a dump, and I have to do another reload. You remember, I used to have some issues with parachutes and stuff too. Using my crystal ball to look into the future, because I've already actually landed it, and I'm going to narrate it after having done that, I can tell you that the first ascent vehicle did not have an issue where it crashed when the chutes were opening, although it wasn't entirely without its problems. And I'll try to tell you what some of those were and what I did to solve them. In fact, we're going to get into that now because here it goes. This is the first ascent module on its way descending right now. You can see the trajectories mod is showing us where it's going to come down. This is the first time I'm using trajectories in 0.25 to try to estimate where it's going to go. It comes in pretty close, but I still have a little bit of driving to do once we get to the ground. But before we get to that point, let's begin with problem number 1. The way this is supposed to work is when I stage the first chute, it will open up and start putting some drag on the shell, and then I activate the next stage, which releases the shell piece and then theoretically is going to drag it off because the chute is attached to it. However, the chute wasn't automatically arming itself, so I had to go inside the fairing and try to find them by hand, although I activated the wrong ones. And what we're watching here is actually the second attempt at the landing. The first time I tried to land, I didn't realize that the chutes were just not arming, and I wasn't sure what was going on, so I did a reload, and then I started paying more attention to it, noticed what was happening, and then started activating them by hand, but like I said, got it wrong. So ultimately, this will end up in me reloading one more time, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do now with this weird bug of the things not arming. I try to arm them ahead of time, but that just makes them all open, rather than opening at the time when I stage them. They have both a deploy and an arm button, and it seems like regardless of whether I press arm or whether I press deploy, it opens it in both cases. So that's just not working out the way I had originally planned for it at all. So this time I reload and try it one more time, activating by hand, using the arm, which, like I said, makes them open up already. So they're already opened, even though I didn't intend for that. And I think, once again, I may have the right... No, I think I have the right ones this time. Yeah, you can tell by in the staging, the little yellow chute, it's indicating that we have the right one. So when I activate that next stage and cause the decoupling of those shells, this time the parachutes pull the shells away just like I had been expecting. But now comes the tricky part of figuring out which is the next set to activate by hand, and at first I wasn't finding the ones I want, and also we're overshooting the landing site because I'm spending so much time trying to figure out what's going on here. So, you know, it's gonna happen. We're gonna reload one more time while I try and work out all the bugs of this landing. One of those bugs being the weird noise of the activation of these engines for the next stage that's coming down. They keep on creating the sound effect as if they're being activated, but they just do it way more than they should. Although ultimately it does stop all by itself. I don't know exactly what that was either, but I'm not going to try and investigate it if it fixes itself. I have a dozen modules to land, and I have no time to spend on stuff that's just gonna auto-correct. So this time around, it seems like we're coming in a little bit better. I'm getting the hang of which chutes to activate, and I've got the engine thrusting at just the right time and for the right amount of time so that we'll come down in the spot where I want. If you're wondering why I have chutes on the engine section, it's because I'm supposed to use it in a different way that I'm actually using it. What I had intended was to come in shell first after slowing down. We would flip it over, and then the engine would be on the back side, so activating those chutes all by themselves would then drag that section away, just like how we had pulled the shell away. but because I'm activating it on the wrong side, since I can't seem to flip it, that makes it look like it's backward. And then we see the next issue, some kind of symmetry bug. One of the parachutes is gigantic, and because it's so big, it's holding up the nose of the craft more than I had intended. So now, being concerned that it's gonna come down on its butt and break something, I activate the engines, hoping that I can get some sort of control to lift myself up and come down on those, but there's too much fuel, the whole thing is too heavy, so we're going to end up draining some of that fuel, dumping it overboard, because we can drill fuel later anyway. Now, normally, if something goes wrong, I had intended on just going with it, roll with the punches, as it were, and not really reverting unless I had claimed ahead of time it was a simulation, which I didn't on these, so these are not simulations. Or if I face a bug, but I'll be honest, I feel like I'm facing some weird bugs that I have to deal with simply because I'm on version 0.25 still for this install. So I am going to be doing a little bit of reverting until I can figure out what these bugs are coming from and try to get them fixed. Like on that landing, I figured maybe if I cut the chute at just the right time, then I can compensate for it. But that didn't work out, so then the next attempt was to dump some fuel, try and lighten the load so that the engines would have more ability to control the descent. But ultimately, my decision was that I would shut down the front engines entirely, only run the back engines, which would then lift up the back end a little bit more and allow for a nice, safe landing. Even though there was one more reload because I didn't realize what was going on here at first. I thought I was falling because I couldn't see chutes, and so I didn't activate things at the right time. It just turned out that the chutes aren't showing up because I had reloaded, and it's yet another bug with the old version. So yeah, it may not look like it, but the chutes are still there, and this time, knowing that, I'm able to get the craft under control with just the thrust in the back after having dumped some of the fuel. So finally, all the variables came out, worked out together, and after landing safely, we begin our trip off to the airlock site. It's relatively flat ground from here to there, so we get going up to a pretty good speed, 20 to 25 meters per second. These wheels are pretty good, and the craft is heavy enough that it keeps it down on the ground steady. There's just enough give in the suspension that it'll bounce a little bit, but the wheels don't seem to be leaving the ground, so I get it going at full speed, and we just barrel on ahead. I think it only took about 3 minutes to make the drive over there at that speed. It wasn't that far away. Unfortunately, once I arrived, I noticed that there was some sort of scaling problem, another thing that has been fixed in 1.04 but still exists back in this install. Every now and then when you have a root part that isn't exactly the right scale, you can reload the game and it won't show up correctly, and so that's what happened when I first arrived, but then after reloading it was okay. So at that point, I activated the drill. It sunk itself down into the Duna topsoil, going as deep as it could, which was just enough to start bringing in the kethite. Remember, it is not kethane, it is kethite. It is a resource of my own construction. I drill it up using the parts from the carbonite mod, but it's also not carbonite. So we activate the generator that is powered off of the kethite. It'll generate the electricity we need to keep the drill going after that. The drill must be shaking the ground because the airlock in the background there is jumping around like a little jumping bug. Filling up our local storage tank while at the same time using the converter to generate hypergolic fuel and just a tiny bit of waste that we'll dump overboard later. And that's it. Our ascent module has proven that it will at least be fueled up and ready to go. Whether it flies correctly or not, that remains to be seen later. Next up, we need to bring down a habitation module. Now, technically, the Kerbals, if they really had to, they could live in a rover or maybe just in the cabin of the drill module, perhaps even in the descent module they come in. But ideally, we will have the habitation module going as well as a greenhouse and some other modules all hooked up together so that they, for all of the time that they're going to have to spend here, they won't go stir crazy in there. My technique on this descent is that every now and then I put another maneuver node trying to redirect this module to get a little closer to the target, because I do have fuel still and we might as well use up that fuel while we can. Once we're really close, or if the fuel runs out, then it's time to decouple the engine section, activate the chutes that will bring down the habitation module nice and slow, but there's also some engines on there, little extra fuel radially attached in some cases, sometimes underneath, because despite the chutes, there isn't much atmosphere here at Duna. We're coming down really fast. And we don't want to hit the ground so hard that any of these things break. So those engines are designed to provide just enough thrust to ease the descent, but not really enough that we could go back up again on them. And there's just enough fuel to supply the landing, but beyond that, there really isn't anything. You could see off in the distance there, the engine section came down. We're not too worried about that. We won't need anything off of that. Okay, so remember back when I was on the moon and every time we got close to our base, things would pop up in the air? Well, here we go again. Since this is still 025, we still have that issue. I haven't seen that in 104. But you're seeing it here, and I'll give you a little glimpse into the future. It happens on the next module as well. Fortunately, in this case, the drill came back down on the drill side on the bottom side, so it's still drilling. Although you can see the airlock has rescaled itself back down again to its smaller size, although later I'll reload and it'll come back in as the big size, and then later I reload again and it comes in as a smaller size, so it just seems to be completely random. Alright, so on the ground, we have the airlock, we have a drill, the drill is functioning, we're filling up the fuel, we have an ascent vehicle so that if all goes wrong, we can at least get off the surface. We have a habitation module, so now we want to bring down some cargo. They're going to need some of this stuff in order to do the work, the science that's required. We need to find the anomaly that's going to recombine with the other half of the Omega-13 back on Kerbin and allow us to open the portal to go home. I still need to activate the chutes by hand, but now that I know what to expect, it's much easier and I'm getting used to it. And we activate those, open up the shell, and once they can pick up a little bit of the air, it pulls them off. We release the engine section and that comes off. And now down goes our cargo carrier. We are pretty far away from our landing site in this case, but all of these things are rovers, so we can simply drive them autonomously over to the landing site. This one is tipping a little bit, just like one of the earlier ones. Not quite as bad, so I'll just ease up the engines, the landing engines on the back side, leaving the front engines as strong as they can possibly be. That way they'll go higher, they'll push the front higher than the back is getting pushed, and that'll even it out just in time to let it get down, touch down nice and gently. Meanwhile, you saw the engine section there crash down, and somehow it's managing to stay upright on that one engine. I've recently been looking into MKS, the USI mod, and if I were using that, I'd have the ability to do scrapping of parts in order to get resources. It's too bad I'm not using that, although I have been thinking about trying a 1.04 version using that, because then I could have gone over there, scrapped some of that stuff on that engine section we just lost, and gotten some resources out of it. Well, anyway, maybe in a future series. For now, we're going to take this rover across until we can get to our base and find out whether or not the entire base is going to pop up in the air like it has been doing. At this point, I didn't know whether it was going to. I'll tell you now, it is. So keep an eye on the modules when we get close, and look how high they bounce in the air. This is definitely going to be a problem as we bring in more and more modules. When we get close to the base, if everything's jumping in the air like that, at some point, something might get destroyed, or a module might flip over in a way that I can't write it again. So this is another reason to move my version ahead as soon as I possibly can. Those issues just don't seem to be plaguing me anymore in the latest release. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what to do for the next series. Odyssey's almost at the end. Obviously, we want to continue with Project Alexandria and the spin-off Enterprise, where we make the shuttle. Those are a given. I'm just going to keep going with Alexandria until at some point we completely catch up on modern times. But I won't be doing just those, so I have to have another idea, and Oh, here we are at the base. Look at them pop up in the air. We'll have to deal with that off screen. A little bit of save game editing may be in order here. Anyway, what to do after Odyssey? As I mentioned, I've been thinking about a 1.04 USI MKS series where I experiment with some of that new life support and base resource management, but I've also been thinking about doing my own version of the Martian in real solar system. I keep thinking that I've decided. One day I'm absolutely sure it's going to be USI MKS. The next day I'm absolutely sure it's going to be the Martian. Or my interpretation of that sort of a concept, if not necessarily following it verbatim. The next module coming up is our greenhouse. The base is looking pretty good. We have all of the major components. We should be able to land now. So from this point, everything that we might be landing is just to make the base even a little bit better. So this module coming down, the greenhouse, is going to extend our capability of staying for a long time by growing extra food down on the surface. It's probably going to start getting a little bit laggy once we bring in this latest module, so I think only one more will come down after this, the science module. Remember, all the extras were backups, just in case something went wrong with one of the ones that's coming down now. I will double check what's out there in orbit. It's possible there's one more beyond the science module that I intended to bring down. I think there's a food module. And between the greenhouse and the food, they could stay here for a very long time. Alright, so there we go. The greenhouse is now released. The chutes have opened, and we are coming down much slower. It's time to test out the infernal robotics joints that extend out those arms where the greenhouses themselves are. Unfortunately, it looks like one of the wheels might be jammed. It's possible we'll be able to ride on that anyway, but if not, we can drive over here later with a Kerbal and fix the wheel, hopefully, and then ultimately bring this back over to the base. As it hits the ground, in order to cushion things a little, I activate the infernal robotics, making it just a little bit more springy, and so nothing explodes and we touch down gently. I start driving away before I even think to check on that wheel, and then I check on the wheel and realize that apparently hitting the ground popped it free, so now we're okay, although the steering wasn't working. Well, that just turned out that some of the wheels were inverted, and rather than inverting them again, I decided to simply deactivate the steering on all of the wheels except the two in the back. So right now we're going with some rear wheel drive, heading over the Duna dunes, making our way over to the rest of the base and hoping that everything doesn't pop up in the air so high that it comes down all crooked again like last time. What I might need to do is bring the Kerbals down next and hook the base all together, because that way, if it pops up in the air, it'll be very difficult to flip anything over again. They'll all be attached. As you can see, as we arrive this time, things do, again, pop in the air, but the drill doesn't go high enough that it flips over, although the hab does. So we're going to need to move the hab a little bit closer. I want to get it up to the airlock, which has its scaling issue going on once again. Once we have the hab moved over to the airlock, we get the greenhouse shifted down closer to the hab, and then we'll move the cargo vessel over closer to the hab as well. And with that, we will have gotten 4 new modules down here to join the airlock, which I think is going to do it for this time. There won't be any interludes because you got plenty of that in the last 2 episodes. So yep, that's going to do it for now. Until next time, I will see you later, Kerbonauts.